Crossing. I'm so glad you're here. My name is Ross, and we are not really in a series for today. We're going to start a new series next week that I think is going to be both a lot of fun, really enjoyable, and also very beneficial. Those are my goals anyway. It's called Black Box. Sounds very mysterious, but that'll be starting next week. For today, we're taking a week to just talk about something that Jesus talked about a lot, because this is something that we kind of have to come back to every so often, because otherwise what happens is we drift and we don't realize it, and terrible things happen. I mean that very truly, and they don't feel terrible, but they are. And so we come back to things like this, and so this is going to be something that if you spend a lot of time in church or around here, you've probably heard before, and it's going to be very, very tempting to be like, all right, I've heard it. But this is the most important thing, and if you're here and maybe you've like half heard or never heard some of these things, you're going to walk out of here maybe thinking, why does not every church talk only about this every single weekend? And so there's not really that much to say, but there's also kind of a lot to it. It's really pretty simple, but there's a lot of ground to cover. So we're going to be jumping right in with a very interesting verse in Luke 15:1, which says that tax collectors and other notorious sinners often came to hear Jesus teach. That's interesting, isn't it? Tax collectors and other notorious sinners often came to listen to Jesus teach. I don't know if you're here, if you think maybe that you would fall into that category of notorious sinner, or maybe if, like, other people would look at you and think that you might fall into that category of notorious sinner. But if that's you, I suspect that it might have been really difficult to step into Life Point Crossing or to come to a church, right? I suspect if that's you, you don't walk by churches or drive by churches and look and say, yeah, that's my people. I know that when I go there, I'm going to be welcomed and loved and supported when I'm struggling through. And it was probably very difficult for you to come into a church. Isn't it interesting that the notorious sinners didn't seem to have any weirdness at all coming and listening to Jesus? And as the body of church, as the physical manifestation of Jesus currently on the planet, did I say the body of church? I meant the body of Christ, the physical manifestation of Jesus currently on the planet. The church really ought to be a lot like Jesus. So isn't it interesting that they didn't have any trouble at all? In fact, it kind of sounds like they liked to come and listen to Jesus teach. And so here's what this leads to, though, is this: the notorious sinners often came to listen to Jesus teach, made the Pharisees and the teachers of religious law complain that he was associating with such sinful people, even eating with them. Seemed like he welcomed them and associated openly with them. And of course, the Pharisees and teachers of religious law, these are the good people who were doing everything right. Then there's this guy Jesus, and he has this growing influence, and people really seem to love him and to listen to him and be with him, but they were exactly the wrong kind of people. These were the people that you would have nothing to do with if you had any interest in your reputation. Clearly, God had given up on these people. They were just going to be sinners. So, guy, what are you doing? What are you doing? So, because the Pharisees and teachers of religious law were complaining, Jesus told them the story. If a man has 100 sheep and one of them gets lost, what will he do? Now, Jesus had been teaching enough at this point that he recognized surely that when he asked people questions, they generally gave wrong answers. So he doesn't even give them a chance to answer wrong. He just goes ahead and answers for them. He says, won't he leave the 99 others in the wilderness and go search for the one that is lost until he finds it? And then people said, okay, that's actually what I was going to say, but I wasn't sure, but Jesus got it for them. And then he adds, when he has found it, he will joyfully carry it home on his shoulders. When he arrives, he will call together his friends and neighbors, saying, rejoice with me, because I have found my lost sheep. Why are we talking about sheep? He says, well, in the same way, there is more joy. Third time just in this couple verses that he's using a version of the word joy. There's more joy in heaven over one lost sinner who repents and returns to God than over 99 others who are righteous and haven't strayed away. So this is very simple and everybody there understood, but it's also really quite beautiful and very compelling. Of course, the notorious sinners are pictured as the sheep that is lost. And there's no indication that the shepherd or the man with the 100 sheep here necessarily valued that as more valuable than any of the 99, because there's every reason to believe, right, that if any of the other 99 were lost, then he would do the same thing and go out and look for them, right? But they weren't. They were safe. And so it's clear that the way that the shepherd views the lost sheep is very, very differently from the way that the religious leaders were viewing the notorious sinners. They saw them as having no value. You can give up on them. Don't even worry about it. But Jesus saw them as having tremendous value. And going out to find a lost sheep can be very difficult. It might even have a low chance of success. I don't know. But that's what he was going to do. And he was saying that when we do this, listen, it's joyful when somebody is found, so much so that like a party begins like nobody's business, because God cares about that lost sheep and that lost sinner. In fact, it looks like not only would they have value, they would in fact have priority. And so clearly everybody in the parable is some sort of a sheep. If you're here and you have followed Jesus, you've committed to him, you're adopted into his family and forgiven, then we're pictured as sort of the safe sheep, right? And of course, that would have been the same for the Pharisees and the religious leaders. Some of them may not have been as safe as they would have liked to think, but that's another message for another day. But that's really, as we remember, who this is spoken to. Right? And so it was to them and really to you that Jesus is speaking about the priority and the value of the lost sheep. Now, if you're here and you're not a follower of Jesus, maybe you're a notorious sinner, maybe you're as reasonably good of a person as anybody else, but just for whatever reason have not made the decision to follow and commit to following Jesus, this is a clear picture of how God feels about you. He's after you. He's pursuing you. He wants you found like nothing else in the world. And for the rest of us, if that's how Jesus sees people, then probably that's how we should see people too. But Jesus isn't done. Of course, he goes on and he tells another short story. It's very, very similar, except in this one, we won't flash all the verses up because there's just a lot to get through. But in this one, instead of a man with 100 sheep, there's a woman with 10 gold coins, and she loses one. So what is she going to do? Well, she tears her house apart looking for the one lost coin. It's not more valuable than any of the 9 coins she has. It kind of sounds like it's not explicit, but they're probably all the same value, the same type of coin. But the 9 that she has, well, she has those. They're there. And so she goes and she does everything she can to search for the one lost coin. And then it's very similar. When she finds it, says it ends with the exact same way. There is joy in heaven over the one lost coin that is found, over the one last sinner who repents and returns to God. Just in case there's any confusion, what we were talking about, the point's made very clearly. And so as a pastor and as a church, it seems like we ought to be seeking and valuing and prioritizing the same things that Jesus would seek and value and prioritize, which is his lost ones being found. And Jesus isn't done yet. There's a third story, and this one's, in fact, a little longer and a little more complicated, and is really very often, it's not quite misunderstood, but the real point of the story is often missed, the biggest point of the story anyway, and this just pictures a man that has 2 sons. And one of the sons, the younger son, pulls, well, it's quite a bit, so we'll paraphrase the setup just for time, but the younger son pulls an incredible punk move, my phrase, not Jesus. And he goes to his dad, and he says, "Dad, Father who raised me and gave me life, you're not really dying quickly enough for my tastes. uh, you might have 10 or 20 years left, and those are years in between me and your inheritance. Kind of tired of waiting. So what do you say, just between you and me, let's just kind of pretend like you're dead. And then I can take my portion of the inheritance, and then that's cool, right? Is there any reason to say no to that? And of course, because it's a made-up story, the father goes along with it. And a couple of days later, the young son packs up and leaves, and you know that there are few things in the world that are worse than a young person with a lot of money and very poor judgment. And obviously, he already has a very poor judgment just based on the fact that he approached his father like this in the first place. And so Jesus says that he went off and says that he wasted all of his money in what he calls a wild living in a faraway place. Now, things really take a turn, however, when two things happen at the same time, which is number one, he runs out of money, and then number two, there's a famine in the faraway place where he is, and now there's very, very little food, and so he has nothing to do. The best he can come up with is to take a job caring for pigs, which this is not like a Missouri farmer who raises hogs because we all love bacon and pulled pork. These people are Jewish, and working with pigs was deeply, deeply, deeply offensive. But he had no other options, and he gets so bad where he's looking at the pig food that he's feeding to the pigs, and that's looking good to him, but he can't even have that. This is rock bottom. And he has nobody to blame but himself, and nothing you can really go back on. He told his father that he wished he was dead and treated him as if he was. That's pretty tough to take back. The money, that's gone. That doesn't come back. And so he's there with absolutely no options. And some of you have been there and you know what that's like. Some of you, I hope it's not you, but some of you might be there right now. And so here's what happens. This is where we'll pick up Jesus. He said, when he finally came to his senses, he said to himself, at home, even the hired servants have food enough to spare. And here I am dying of hunger. So I'll go home to my father, and he puts together this rehearsed, memorized speech. He says, okay, I'll say, Father, I've sinned against both heaven and you. I know I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Please take me on as a hired servant. He understands what he's done. He knows exactly how terrible it was. Going back and being a part of the family to the way things used to be, that is so far out of the question, it's not even a thought. He knows what he really deserves is a slap in the face and a call to the cops. But he says, maybe if we hit this just right, if I apologize sincerely enough, if I grovel lowly enough, maybe I can just get hired on as an entry-level employee, and I'll still be working in the fields, but at least I'll have food. And can you imagine the nerves and the anxiety as he begins to approach his home? He's completely out of options, and now his one and only last shot is at the mercy of the one who he has offended the most deeply. And that might be how some of you felt when you walked into a church or when you come into Life Point Crossing. You're in a situation where maybe you are completely out of options, and you know that you've been exactly the wrong kind of person for however long. You've ignored God's voice. You've pushed him aside. You've done everything wrong. And so you come in and you almost didn't. You really didn't want to, but you just didn't have any other options. And so you came in and you knew you'd never be able to be like everybody else there. You knew that you'd been doing everything wrong, and you were going to be shamed and made to feel like garbage, but you already felt like garbage, so what is there to lose? Maybe they'll have some sort of a scrap for me. Just like this son comes home knowing that seeing his father is going to be looking into the eyes of disappointment, and you're a failure, and I told you so. So he returned home to his father. And while he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming, filled with love and compassion. He ran to his son, embraced him, and kissed him. His son said to him, he starts into his speech, "Father, I've sinned against both heaven and you. I'm no longer worthy of being called your son." His dad cuts him off. He doesn't even get through the whole thing. His father says to the servants, "Quick, bring the finest robe in the house and put it on him. Get a ring for his finger and sandals for his feet, and kill the calf we've been fattening. We must celebrate with a feast. For this son of mine was dead and has now returned to life. He was lost, but now he's found." And so the party began. And if that's you, I hope that is exactly what you feel when you walk into Life Point Crossing. What matters isn't where you've been or what you've done. What matters is how God feels about you. And here is a clear and beautiful picture of it. He's running to you with love and compassion and just wants you to come home. But that's not the end of the parable. And in fact, it's a very real point, but it's not the main point. Because you remember, he's not talking right now to the notorious sinners. Everything else that he says in John, this is Luke, is to the notorious sinners. But this is to the religious leaders, to the good people who wished that he wasn't spending so much time and even giving priority to the exact wrong sort of people. And so Jesus continues, because you remember there were two sons, and the older son hasn't really even been mentioned to this point. Where's he been this whole time? Well, he's been out in the fields working for Pops, doing everything exactly right, is what he's been doing. And so then when he hears what's going on with his younger brother, pretty understandably, he's not particularly happy about it. He says the older brother was angry, wouldn't go in. And so his father came out and begged him. But he replied, and it makes a lot of sense, "All these years I've slaved for you and never once refused to do a single thing you told me to. And what was my reward for that? In all that time, you never gave me even one young goat for a feast with my friends. Yet when this son of yours comes back after squandering, by the way, your money on," and Jesus had just said wild living, here's what it really was. He says, "your money on prostitutes." Right? It's fun when churches talk about how, with people who maybe are far from God, sometimes it can get messy, and then that's like really fun to say, like, okay, well, that's all right, I'm good with messy. Here's what this really is hookers and blow. That's the reality of the situation. Squandering your money on prostitutes. You celebrate by killing the fatted calf. You have to understand how he's unhappy, right? How it seems like he gets so little for doing everything right, and then his screw-up brother does everything wrong, and now he comes back and he gets to be the celebrity. That doesn't seem right, does it? That doesn't seem fair, does it? Why is Jesus with the notorious sinners instead of with me, who's been serving him this whole time, instead of with us, who have been serving him the whole time? And so the Father's answer is the end of this parable and all three parables, and this is just the whole thing. His father said to him, "Look, dear son, you have always stayed with me. You've been great. You have. And everything I have is yours. We had to celebrate this happy day, for your brother was dead and has come back to life. He was lost, but now he's found." And that's all that's said. Apparently that's all there was to say. Apparently that's all that needed to be said. I'm a dad that lost a son, and now he's back. I'm a dad with a son. He's not exactly lost like the son in this parable, but you can certainly imagine that he means an absolute ton to Laura and myself. He's around from time to time. Some of you have met him. Some of you know him. His name's Charles. Do you know what church I'm the most grateful for right now? It's not Life Point Crossing. You're a really, really strong second. Extremely strong second. But you're not first. The church that I'm most grateful for is a very, very large multi-campus church in the Denver area, one of these with like where the most places the message gets piped in on a video, and it's called Mission Hills Church. And why am I so grateful for Mission Hills Church? Is it because they have really unusually great preaching? No, they don't. It's because I absolutely love the music. Nope, I don't. Is it because that's where God changed my life? Never been there. If you're good with context clues, you could probably take a guess. It's the church that Charles has been a part of and actually has been interning with for several months, and he has had a great experience and only good things to say about the ministry and the people and the organization and everything that happens there. Every single day I pray for him. And Mission Hills Church has been one of the biggest answers to those prayers. And here's why that's happened. Is because hundreds of people who I will never meet, and most of whom probably never meet Charles, have prayed and served and invited and given. And so thousands of people, including our son Charles, are being impacted by the ministry of the church. I hope there's somebody that you care enough about that you've been praying and continuing to pray for. And maybe it's somebody right around here in our area. Maybe it's someone on the other side of the world who doesn't even speak English. And realistically, there's no chance LifePoint Crossing is ever going to be able to have any impact on them. So I'm not going to ask you to be a part of and to support LifePoint Crossing, because then we'll reach that person that matters to you. Maybe that could be, but I feel like it's a little manipulative, maybe a lot manipulative, and it might be completely implausible. But you know this is true. There are thousands of parents and grandparents and brothers and sisters and good, godly, loving friends who are praying like mad that someone or something or some ministry will intersect Jesus and the person who they love in or around Blue Springs and Independence, Missouri. That there would be someone or something that'll be out looking for some lost sheep, digging stuff up for some lost coin, welcoming back, shouting from the largest mountaintop that they can that God's lost children are wanted and valued and welcomed and loved. And so as we start the new year, it is so easy, I know it is. You just slip back into the default mode of things are about me, things are about us, this is who we are. Jesus is about us being about them. So here's what you can do. It's really the same as always. We'll go pretty quickly. That doesn't mean they're not important, but number one is always pray. Number one is always pray. It's not lip service. It's because number one is always pray. Do you know what would happen if all of us made it a point and a consistent commitment to really call on God for the good and the ministry of the people who we love and the church? I don't think I've seen it. I'm pretty sure I haven't seen it. I do think I know what happens when we don't. And make no mistake, God uses his people, but also no person can change another person's heart. Pray. Number two is invite. Realistically, this is the most common way this happens, is it takes someone who cares for another person and has a relationship with them and says, hey, why don't I come by and grab you Sunday morning, we'll go get breakfast and go to church, or go to church and then watch the game, or go get lunch, or whatever it is you do. And it's often really, really awkward. And sometimes it goes really, really poorly. But you have to know that it would have been so much easier for that son to come home if somebody had said, here, come on, let's go. You're going to be welcomed. You're going to be loved. I'll come get you. Number 3 is to actually be a part of the ministry and serve. Right now, there are children in the back who are much less likely to go and waste their inheritance while living in a faraway land because there are people who are teaching them and pointing them to Jesus. It's great for the kids. The parents get to listen to something for themselves. There is no way to overestimate the impact of the children's ministry. Every week, this place has to be clean. People come in and, whether consciously or unconsciously, are open or closed to what a church has to say because of all sorts of external factors. You can be a greeter and serve at the door and make people see and feel from the moment they walk in how they are welcomed and valued. Whoever you are, whatever you are, there are 1,000 ways to be a part in a way that suits you. A couple months ago, I had a high school kid come to me and say, I want to start something to help to really teach and guide the junior high kids. This week, there was someone who came up in the middle of the week to help shovel off the sidewalks. Half of you don't even know her name. Whoever you are, whatever you are, there's something you can do to help serve and be a part of the ministry. And of course, number 4 is give. This all takes a fair amount of money, probably more than you would think if you've never seen a church budget or operated an organization, but it also gives you another opportunity to be a part of seeing the ministry happen. And you guys, you got to know this is not hype. This right here, the local church, like right now, today, like whether or not anybody else ever comes, this is the greatest thing in the world. Right here, right now, this is it. I'll tell you, I know some of you, if you're cynical, you might think, yeah, Ross, you're here because it's your job. I did take the job, but I took the job because it's what I wanted. It's because I tell you that, like outside of powerlifter, I was a person who had options, and this is what I chose when I was a young person, and just a few years ago when life went through a transition and I had a chance to reevaluate everything, this is what I chose again. I get to choose what I give my life to, and this is what I choose because this is the greatest thing in the world. And it's about Jesus and other people. What will you do? Thank you for whatever way, the many ways in which so many of you are and have been and will continue to be a part. What is it that you can do in the year to come to pray, invite, serve, and give, to welcome God's children home? What'll it be? Is that too long, Laura? She nods yes. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much that when we were lost, you came to seek and to find us. That when we had nothing but sinfulness, you valued us, you cared for us, you sacrificed the life of Jesus Christ for us so that we could come home and be the children that you would have us to be. I'm still praying if you're here and for whatever reason you have not made that decision, that commitment to trust in Jesus. This is literally what the God of the universe would have for you. Still praying that right now that you would call on him and out loud, if you're an out loud person, or even you talk to him in your heart and he'll hear you. You say, God, I believe that Jesus Christ came and died and resurrected so that I could be forgiven and be adopted as a child in your family. Please come into my life. Forgive me and adopt me. Begin to make me into the person who you created me to be, and give me the life that you have for me. And if you just prayed a prayer like that, it's not the words of the prayer that saves you, it's your faith in Jesus. God's grace comes to you through that, and you are forgiven and adopted as a child in God's family. This is the greatest thing that can ever happen, will you please do the next greatest thing that can ever happen and not try to live this life in Jesus alone? Let somebody know. There'll be a person out at the point. That's just the corner in the lobby when we're through here. Let them know the decision you made, or if you're online, send us a message, and we can follow up with some good next steps in being who God created you to be. This is the greatest thing that can happen in a human being's life or in the life of a church. And for the rest of us, probably we've heard this. These are well talked about, often talked about, sometimes become cliche or just another thing that Jesus said things. I know I've been in church for most of my whole life. Will we let that make an impact on the way that we are, the way that we operate, and what we value as a people and as individuals and as a church body, to be the church that God would have us be, and to be that part of the church that God would have us be, that we can see some lost kids come home. It is messy. Man, stuff gets really difficult. Sometimes it costs you something. Sometimes things that you would never expect happen and you don't know how to deal with it, and it's really hard. Not like when you just say it's really hard, but it's really hard. What's worth it? Let's value what God values. Let's be about seeing his people come home. Whatever it is, every one of us can pray. Every one of us can invite. Every one of us can serve in one way or another, and some of you already do in 80. And every one of us can give whatever it is that we can give. Some of us are able to give huge amounts. Some of us are able to give whatever it is we can give. And it's not really so much about the amount, it's that we do it. Father, thank you so much. Give each one of us, I pray, including myself, Father, start with me, the strength and the courage and the follow through to not have this be a nice message that we forget by tomorrow morning, but to fundamentally change and alter and decide the direction of our lives as we live as the physical manifestation of your Son Jesus on this earth, that we would be like him. In Jesus' name, amen.